movies, honey.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
We have eternity to know your flesh.
Piss your pants. I said, piss your pants. I think we just picked up Dracula.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
You go right on your...
Stay when you're down here with me. You blood soul! My family's always been in me.
The whole family of Draculas.
So, horror movies.
Yes, indeed, horror movies. They're a thing.
They are a thing, and they're a thing we talk about on here. And this one, whew, boy, oh boy, is it a little polarizing. This is a movie that, for the most part, you either love it or you hate it. As you've seen by the title, this time we're talking about the Blair Witch Project. And my guest on this episode is my friend Trevor Charity. How are you doing, Trevor?
Doing good. How's everybody doing? Hope everybody's good.
You like the Blair Witch Project quite a bit, huh?
Yeah, I do. I'm a big fan of it. I remember back in the 90s really liking it and obviously really terrified of it. It's one of the rare movies that actually scared me when I was a kid. Unlike, not saying Halloween is not a scary movie, but I mean, I loved Halloween. Blair Witch, I was batshit like fucking terrified of.
So, like, how old were you when you saw this movie?
I would have to say probably in my like early teens. Like I would probably say like 10 or 11, I would think.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because like it was, and it's not only that, but we'll probably talk a little bit more about it. But like the viral marketing of this movie, like really played up the legitimacy of the story and the believability of it too. Because since it was like the early ages of the internet, it really made it played it up like it was real, and even like the sci-fi special that they had, it made it sound like it was real, and I was scared as all shit.
Which to me, if full disclosure, I'm not the biggest fan of this movie.
Okay.
But I am a big fan of the viral marketing that went along with it.
Right. Yeah.
I think that was genius. I think the way all that was handled was great. My perspective on it's going to be a little bit different than yours, just because of like the little bit of age difference.
Yeah.
Between us, and the things I saw post Blair Witch that drove me crazy.
Okay.
But to get to all that, we kind of have to go to the beginning of the story of the Blair Witch Project, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that story starts in 1991, while Dan Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez are students at UCF in Florida. They both thought that documentaries on paranormal stuff were more frightening than like traditional horror movies were, right?
Right, and I would actually kind of agree with that because, like, you know, whether if it was, you know, staged or if it was, you know, actually caught on camera, you know, you wouldn't know because like the line of believability is so thin in those documentaries.
So and this is where I am in almost 100% stark disagreement with them, because nothing to me is more painfully bad to watch. Like, I'm not a reality TV guy at all, and like all those paranormal shows, the Ghost Hunters and all that shit, I have never once been scared of anything on any of those shows ever. It's just a bunch of dudes walking around talking to a fucking field recorder and going, "Who's here?" and then getting scared of nothing. There's never anything, nothing weird ever happens. It's just scared dudes in their early 30s walking around dark buildings in night vision.
And that I will agree with you on that, because a lot of the television shows, they have to catch something every episode, because you have to keep people coming back, so they have to produce something like, did you hear that? I think I heard something, guys. And they have to pretend like that they heard something. So I agree. That I do agree. And
that's like the show Monster Hunter, right?
Yeah.
Like, years ago, I said there's no reason to watch the show Monster Hunter. And a friend of mine was like, "Why? What if they find something?" And I was like, "Dude, if they found something, you would have heard about it already." Like, if they find the fucking Wolfman, there's going to be a news article. Like, holy shit, werewolves are real.
Yeah,
like,
it's not going to be on the History Channel.
Right. That news is not going to fucking save itself for the episode of Monster Hunters. But so the original idea behind this, they had it set in the 70s instead of the 90s where it ended up at. And I get where they were going from there, because the 70s are inherently creepier than the 90s. Like, things are a little less like available, right? Like it's things seem a little more dangerous, I guess, in the 70s.
Exactly, because it feels like, you get, like a lot of people got introduced to drugs and all that stuff and hallucinogens and stuff. So obviously a lot of people's minds are a lot more open back in the 70s than they were in the 90s.
Right. Well, and also like no cell phones and like, you know what I mean? Like, just technology isn't in the same place and stuff. I mean, in the 90s, I guess they're really, for this being supposed to be 1994, there weren't really, I mean, there were cell phones, but you're not going to have them in the fucking woods.
Right. You rarely had them around.
Anyway, and this will be part of it later, but the 70s part gets scrapped just based on a financial standpoint. So both of those guys, and there were some other people in the group that they had, that they eventually get together, but those two kind of go off and do a few other things before returning to the idea in 1996. And they work with a group of producers that include Robin Cowie and Greg Hale. Greg plays a pretty big part in all of this. Greg had joined the military for a little while, and part of his experience in the military goes into how this movie's produced later. And they formed a group called Haxan Films, which is a reference to a 1922 silent horror documentary that they all liked. So Sanchez and Myrick write out a 35 to 40 page screenplay that's intended from the beginning to use completely improvised dialogue to give it more of an authentic feel, so that the people in the woods aren't just trying to remember lines and rattle them off. So that those 35 pages were really more of a history of the Blair Witch myth and the other myths and mythology that they built as the backstory for this whole thing.
Yeah.
Which spoilers, none of it's real.
Yeah.
There's no Blair Witch. There's no history of a Blair Witch. There's not everything in this movie is made up. There's none of it.
Although I will say that there is some actual comparisons to actually an actual witch haunting that happened back in like Connecticut. I think there was a movie about the actual haunting and stuff. Like, there obviously is some comparisons to American folklore and, actual witch stuff and hauntings and stuff, but the actual Blair Witch is not a real thing. Like you said.
Right. Yeah. So they based it very much on like stuff from Salem witch trials and history in that way. But it wasn't, the Blair Witch wasn't real.
Yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
a real thing.
Exactly.
And it speaks to how good that viral marketing ends up being, that you had droves of people who believed fully that that was real shit and that they were going to be able to go follow up on this mythology in the woods of Maryland.
Exactly. I think they actually even like cops even caught people trying to like find the people like when this movie came out.
Yeah, dude, more than that. So as they're building out this idea and working on setting up filming this movie, they hold auditions because they're going to need actors, right? And specifically actors with improv abilities. So they took out an ad in Backstage magazine, which is a magazine that actors look at to try to get gigs, in June of '96. The auditions were held at the Musical Theater Works in New York City. And from the beginning, it was made really clear that this was going to be shot in a wooded location, and it was going to be a very difficult shoot. So much so that they encouraged people not to waste their time if they weren't up for it. So there were signs posted as you went into these auditions, and they were told specifically, we're going to be worried about your safety, not your comfort.
Right.
So they ended up having like 2,000 people audition for this role. And I can't imagine, like, I've sat in on auditions for like some of the little horror movies that my friends and I made. And I cannot imagine auditioning 2,000 people for anything. But out of those 2,000 people, they found their 3. Now, when you went in for this audition, a lot of auditions, like, you would go in and you would read like a monologue from something, right? Just kind of to prove that, you know, you can learn lines and then emote them in a way that's not it doesn't sound like you read some lines. For this, that's not how it was. Every actor walked in and were asked the same question. You've served 7 years of a 9-year sentence. Why should we let you out on parole? The only actor who said they shouldn't was Heather Donahue.
Right.
Now, we'll come back to the cast in a minute. Before they could shoot this in the woods, they had to build the mythology behind the Blair Witch, right? Which we talked about. And, of course, it's all fictional. They also had to scout out the areas that they were going to shoot in. That ended up being, from the stuff that I could find, it seems like Eduardo Sanchez lived in that area of Maryland, like not far from that area, at least. Where it was shot was in Seneca Creek State Park and the town of Burkittsville, which I am sure wishes it had not been.
Yeah, I bet that.
And that's a thing that, again, a little further into this we'll get into, but having this film associated with your town was not necessarily the best thing for a small town to deal with. The original plan for the film as a whole was a little bit different than the film as it exists today, too. The footage that they find that is the film as it exists was originally meant to be a smaller part of a larger film. Now, if that idea sounds familiar, it's because it should. We've actually covered a movie that did that on this show before. Cannibal Holocaust. A film that these guys claim they had never seen. They had no clue that existed. And that's important. They thought that this was the most original idea ever.
That's really interesting how like art echoes itself, even though they never got exposed to Cannibal Holocaust.
Well, did they never get exposed to Cannibal Holocaust?
I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Did they? Or did they go, well, here's a movie that's kind of hard to find that we've found film students who know about films. I'm sure that we could sort of copy what this is, but put it in America and do a twist where it's not cannibals, etc., etc. I just have a very hard time believing that these guys, these film school guys who are into horror stuff, had never seen Cannibal Holocaust. That just seems a little strange to me. And that's not the only controversy that comes up with this film and other films being like, hey, hold on, you're not the first one of these, because these guys really thought the idea of a found footage film, they were first.
Mm-hmm.
And history and reality say otherwise. So with the original plan being what it was, there were two parts of producing this movie. And what we're going to focus on is the footage part, the woods part. There is another part, and the directing of it. The reason, it's when you have a pair of directors, some of the stuff that I worked on had a pair of directors. It can be handled in a few different ways. These guys broke it up pretty down the middle, where Eduardo Sanchez was the director for the footage part, the woods part. Daniel Myrick was the director for the documentary part. Now, the documentary, as time goes on, does not end up being part of the film, although it is in the beginning very much so. Mm-hmm. But it does have a role later on. It ends up being a lot of that TV special, The Curse of the Blair Witch, which, as part of viral marketing, was genius. As part of the film, well, that's debatable.
Mm-hmm.
So aside from the three main cast members, most of the other people in this movie were also plants. Like, they weren't just people on the street that they walked up to in Burkittsville.
Right.
However, the cast wasn't necessarily aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were people from Burkittsville. Others were people that the directors knew. But a lot of them had been put in places specifically by the directors to interact with these actors. A few people, like a small handful of people who were in the movie, were not that. And they just kind of went along with it when they walked up to them with the cameras and made up some bullshit.
Right.
And you can kind of pick out which people those are. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, as you watch the movie. The other thing is, this movie has a cinematographer, Neil Fredericks. And normally a cinematographer's job is to, like, set up shots and make sure that shit's right. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They have a real technical job. Well, this film was shot by the cast. And Neil Fredericks' main job was to kind of give them a crash course in using the gear, which they got over a period of 2 days to learn to use everything. And Neil Fredericks, the stuff I read with him, he really did struggle with like his role and his purpose on the film. But he taught them to use the CP16, the 16 millimeter camera, which working with a real film camera is difficult. And I mean, part of that works its way into the film, like the feet to meters discussion that happens in the movie.
Yeah.
That's a real thing, and it's pretty common when you first start working with a film camera. I am in no way, like, if you handed me a 16 millimeter camera, I've been around them. I know how they work, but I would in no way be able to fucking operate one correctly.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I've seen them, and like, and I'll echo what you said. Like, I wouldn't know how to use one, let alone,
Yeah, it's so much different than like a commercial, like something that's sold to you to use yourself at home. Even like a professional digital camera is so much less different than using a film camera. And then, so the other thing they use in this is a high 8 camera. A high 8 fucking handy cam is what a lot of this movie is shot on. Now that's pretty point and click and didn't take a lot of work, but they also had to use a field DAT for the audio that went along with the 16 millimeter camera. So that DAT recorder required some learning too. The final piece that they needed for the film was the house at the end, and that's in a different place. That is the Griggs house in Pasco Valley State Park in Granite, Maryland. So they have their locations. They know what they're going to do. They have their cast. Now, the cast ended up being Heather Donahue, Josh Leonard, and Mike Williams. And their real names were used in the movie. And most of them seem to regret that at this point. They were originally not supposed to use their real names. They had characters. It was Jane, Bill, and John. But as they were leading up to the time of shooting, there were concerns over them using the wrong names.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided to go with their shoot names.
Gotcha.
I personally, man, I don't know. Using your real name as your character name.
Yeah, because that would be a problem, obviously, in the future, because, you know, people will, whether the movie does well or not, people are going to recognize you and you and the person and everything in real life and stuff. And I know when I was younger, when I used to do videos and stuff with my friends, we would use our shoot names too, because it was easier for us to do it.
Right.
And I could also kind of see the reason why they may have done it, because if you've seen the movie, you know, a lot of the parts of it, they are kind of like, you know, screaming and just yelling. Probably yelling their real names during filming was probably a lot easier than just like Jill, you know, just like stumbling over the names, because you're trying to use their work name and then you're shouting their shoot name.
Right. Well, and you know, the other thing there too is, like, I get that part, but like using your full name.
Oh, like, your government name, yeah.
Like they never really need to use their last names. I don't know. I just, it seems like a strange choice to me. Now, like I said, a lot of the rest of the cast, which is really only there in like the first 15 minutes of the movie, were people that members of the production group knew. So like the fisherman with the glasses is Ed Swanson. He was a friend of Eduardo Sanchez. The other fisherman was an actor that they hired. So many people thought that was a real like father-in-law and son-in-law. And to this day, you can still, like, as you look through shit online, there are people who will swear, "Oh no, those dudes were real. That was real." They were not real. Yeah. The waitress was Eduardo Sanchez's sister. There's one person who was cast in this film, though, that, buddy, she is one of those special things that sometimes you find in this world. And that is the lady who played Mary Brown, Patricia Decoux. So they took out an ad in the local paper for the Burkittsville area, the Burkittsville Granite area, for production assistance, right?
Right.
And so that's a job that generally you're going to expect a younger person to apply for. Generally, that's going to be somebody who's like just out of film school or trying to get into the business, or somebody who's just looking for a break.
Right.
Well, Patricia responded at the young age of 70.
Okay.
Patricia was also batshit crazy. That trailer in the movie is her real trailer.
Oh my God.
The actors had no idea that she was a hired person for the movie. They just assumed she was somebody that they had found, like a local person that they had found for them to talk to, right? And she was hired, and she was kind of told what to tell them in the film. But while they were at her house, she told them crazy stories, some of which is mentioned in the film, about like dancing with Baryshnikov, working for the CIA. Heather Donahue in an interview talks about how when she went into Mary's trailer, it was weird as fuck. and that she had to use the restroom. And when she went through the area where the bedroom was to use the restroom, she says she's positive there was something dead laying in Mary's bed.
Oh my God.
The full cast said the absolute scariest part of this movie, the only time they were ever a little uncomfortable, was filming at Mary's trailer.
Oh my God. And they're like in the dead of the fucking woods.
Yeah, man. They were in some bad places as far as like comfort's concerned. But yeah, dude. So Mary Brown. And that lady has passed away at this point. But
I guess rest in peace.
Yeah. She was a weird lady. So principal photography begins on this movie on October 23rd, 1997. And the shoot lasts for 8 days. They filmed everything they needed to film in Burkittsville first. So all of the stuff with filming in like the cemetery, filming around town at the different locations, all of that stuff happens first. And then they head to Seneca Creek State Park. Now, the movie wants you to believe that these people followed a map through the woods and stuff. And of course, as once you know that it's not actual footage, then there's got to be something with it, right? So things were a little more advanced than a map for them. They were working on a super limited budget, but they had GPS positioning systems that they used to guide the actors, which at that time, that was some pretty high level technology. And it was not as accurate as like what's in your phone now.
And it wasn't even like small either. I remember having a GPS. My mom actually bought one, the first generation of GPSs, and it was bulky as all hell. It was like carrying a concrete brick practically.
Oh yeah, they were big.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was not as good as what you have in your phone now. It was big, it was heavy, and it was not accurate, but it was accurate enough to get them close enough to the drops that they needed. So the way this movie was set up, the crew tried to stay as hands-off as possible, right? And just leave these guys in the woods to do their thing. They had walkie-talkies. So if they needed to, the idea was that they could reach out through the walkie-talkies to the production crew if they had questions or if there was an emergency. To get the things they needed to continue making the film, they would have to get to these different drop spots. At each of these drop spots, they would find a crate, like a milk crate, that had 35 millimeter film canisters marked with their initials on them. So there would be one for Heather, one for Josh, and one for Mike. In those, there would be pieces of paper that would give them instructions like, you don't trust Mike. Things to drive the plot along. At these same drops, they would also leave the high 8 tapes and the film from the 16 millimeter and grab new film and batteries for the cameras. This is also where their food came from. And this is sort of a fucked up thing. So they were given less food each day. For example, let's say in the beginning for lunch, they got a sandwich and a bag of chips. By like day 4, it was just a sandwich. By day 5, it was just the chips. And this was done on purpose to help build tension and to help keep them in character of being stuck in the woods without food. So very much a fucking rough situation, which they were told from the beginning. It wasn't supposed to be comfortable. There was also supposed to be a love interest between Josh and Heather in the beginning. And that was scrapped pretty early on. And it was probably for the best, because very quickly it became clear that there were tensions between them, and they were not sexual.
Oh, yeah.
So those two didn't get along. And it was, in the beginning, I'll say this, from everything that they say in interviews and everything that I could find in commentary and research, a lot of it had to do with Heather Donahue kind of being a jerk. And
you can actually see it in the movie too. Like even though it's all an act and stuff, but you could definitely tell that there was some reality behind some of those lines and the acting, because man, it got really uncomfortable once it started getting when shit gets real in the movie.
Well, yeah, and so there's interesting things with that too. But early on in this movie, both of the guys reached out on the walkie-talkies and said, "Look, man, you've got to talk to her. This is not good. She's horrible, and if this were real, we would just leave her in the woods." And so Eduardo Sanchez came in and talked to her and explained to her, like, "Look, these people are supposed to be helping you. They're not your help." So in the idea of the movie, you've asked these people to come help you make a documentary. So at this point on day one, you probably shouldn't be fucking mean to them.
Right.
And so she scaled it back, and there were hours and hours and hours of footage that they have to go through. They were filming so much every day, and only so much of it is in this movie, and they were able to cut it into some stuff that plays as the relationships developing over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that was done in the editing room. They were kind of at each other's throats from the very beginning. And I sort of understand the standoffishness that Heather Donahue would have had going into this. I mean, she talked about how when she told her friends and family that she was going to go do this, they were like, "Do you think this is a good idea? This doesn't sound like a fucking good idea."
Mm-hmm.
And she brought a big knife with her that she carried, like a big hunting knife that she carried with her the whole time, which, I'll be honest, in Maryland is probably a good idea because, fucking bears. And a knife isn't really going to help you with a bear, but I mean, I guess it's better than nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
But another thing was, she had a genuine concern that they might be making a snuff film, and this was just a fucking trick.
Right. And then that probably also raised tension to the two guys who were just like, "Hey, we're making a movie." And then all of a sudden she shows up with a knife.
Sure. And then her being so hard in character and being, a dick to them from the beginning didn't help.
Yeah.
And so sometimes these guys would have to set up their tent. Other times they didn't. Sometimes the crew actually would set up the tent for them at the location where it needed to be. And they didn't have to carry the tent with them as they hiked through the woods and did shit. There were some unforeseen issues, though. And you can see some of it in the film. There was a really bad storm that happened, and it ended up making it so the GPS didn't work, and they couldn't get the walkie-talkies to work, and there were all kinds of issues. And so a few days into this, they end up at just a fucking person's house saying, "Hey, we're actors, we need help."
Oh my God.
Yeah, and they ended up using their phone to call through to the production team. The rain made everything a little more miserable for the cast. They talked about how at night they would get into the tent and their shit would be wet. And it's October in Maryland.
Yeah.
It's not warm at night. It's not freezing, but it's not warm. And so one of the things that they hated the most was they would just get into their bags and they would just get warmed up. We're like, "Oh, this is wet, but my body heat will warm this up eventually and I'll get warm." And as soon as they would get to that, it would be about that time that the directors would start making noise
and fuck
and doing shit out in the woods, which meant they had to get up and film. As a whole, they said they were never scared. Not once. Just annoyed. They were sure that there's tons of footage of them being like, are you fucking kidding? Right. Okay. I guess we go do this now. So the way those scenes at night would work is the crew would show up and start making noise, and the cast would have to wake up and film and react and do all the things. Mm-hmm. Heather Donahue has a quote which I fully agree with, which is, a pile of rocks is never scary.
That's true. I would definitely say it's definitely not true.
So many interviews I watched, people were like, were you ever scared? And she was like, no. Pile of rocks isn't scary. I was annoyed. So you never see the Blair Witch in this movie, right?
No, absolutely not.
You'd think in a movie about the Blair Witch, you would probably see the Blair Witch, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you're building anticipation to see the Blair Witch, because you're with all the noises, the stories, the ramp up to it, you would expect to see it at the least at the very last second, like the last frame, boom, you see her.
What if I told you were supposed to?
Actually, I would think that would probably be possible, but they probably did not do it.
What if I told you they did it?
That would make sense, and I could see why that would not be in the final product also.
So here was their plan. The night they filmed the scene where the tent is attacked and they run away.
Right, and then when she's screaming, what is that? What the fuck is that? Yeah,
well, there was a that. There was a that there. It was a crew member dressed in a white ski mask and long johns. Who was in the woods, and I'm sure if they had caught it on the film camera in the low light, off in the woods a little bit, it would have just looked like some weird white blob that if they had it on film for even like a second or two, it would have been like, and the inspiration that they talked about for this was like to kind of have like a Bigfoot film moment.
Right.
Where you see it for a second and you're like, oh shit, what was that? But somehow they never caught it on film.
See, that's interesting that you bring up the idea of the Bigfoot, because like a movie just like this, Willow Creek, was a Bigfoot Blair Witch movie, and they too didn't even show Bigfoot. They alluded to it by noises and the rock throwing and the whoops, but again, they never showed it at all. So it's just interesting that you bring up the Bigfoot analogy to Blair Witch.
Willow Creek by famous comedian Bobcat Goldthwait.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Please can't be fame.
Yeah. Willow Creek is part of a thing we'll talk about in a little bit. So there's a lot of things in this movie, like I said, where like there's not a script, but they're guided with different things that they need to do. And one of them was like the whole idea that the map goes away, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Mike was told to get rid of the map, but he was never told like when to tell them. And that whole thing in the movie, like when things are at a fucking really tense moment, he's like, oh yeah, I threw away the map.
Yeah, he just starts laughing and shit. Yeah.
Yeah. That was all on him. He chose all that at that time. That wasn't like instructed. So those are pretty genuine reactions to that. As genuine as you can be, knowing that you have a GPS that's going to get you to the next place that you need to be.
Yeah.
The tooth that's in the little stick bundle package that you're given, that was a real tooth. It was obtained from a local dentist. I can tell you that in the theater when I saw this originally, you could sort of tell it was a tooth.
Yeah, when I originally saw it, I didn't think it was a tooth. Actually, what I thought it was like a vocal cord. For some reason, because it was all bloody and stuff, I thought it was like his vocal cords.
Yeah, like they had cut it out of his throat.
Yeah, that's what I originally thought.
When you so TVs are so much better now than they were in the 90s. But on like an old tube TV, the way I watched this at home the first time, you 100% couldn't tell it was a tooth.
Absolutely.
In watching it back on my Mac the other night, you can 100% tell it's a tooth.
Yes, exactly. It looked exactly like a tooth that Danhausen would have. It literally looked like one of those.
Yeah. But it's amazing to me that, you know, on a giant screen in a theater 20 years ago, I couldn't tell it was a tooth. So the night Josh disappears, his film canister said, wait until they go to sleep, get out of the tent and leave.
And I bet that was like a good sense of relief for Josh.
Josh was happy as fuck. When he got out to where the crew was in the woods, they told him he was dead and he was going home on a bus to New York City. Yeah, all the travel was bus. He recorded his screaming for them to use, and that's that. He's done. The thing is, it wasn't originally supposed to be Josh. The person who was supposed to disappear was Mike.
Okay.
But based on the interactions the cast were having in the videos that they saw, because as the directors would get the tapes back every day, they would watch at least the high 8. I mean, the film has to be developed and stuff.
Yeah.
But they would watch the high 8 every day, and it was very clear that Josh and Heather didn't like each other.
Yeah.
And so to have a better chance at having a film that's not just two people fucking screaming at each other, which it still kind of is, they chose to kill Josh and not Mike.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a mid-production choice.
Right.
So to get the Josh screaming stuff for the later days after he's gone, they just played tapes of him that they recorded through a boombox in the woods.
Okay.
Which the cast has said seemed very obvious in the moment that it was just a boombox playing in the woods.
Right.
But in the film, it worked out better. Now, my guess is if you had been at one of the early screenings before Artisan had this film, it might not have been as good.
Right.
But Artisan eventually dumps a little bit of money into this movie.
Mm-hmm.
The last day of filming, another thing, you know, this filming takes place in the woods. They're in the elements. Well, the Griggs house is in a different place. So for the last day of filming, they put them in a car and drive them to the next location over near the Griggs house. And Mike's notes that day said, when you hear it, follow it all the way up and all the way down. And he had no fucking clue what that meant. And he didn't want to fuck it up. So he reached out on the walkie-talkie and he was like, look, man, this is the last day. This is the last shit. I don't want to mess this up. And I 100% don't understand what you've written here. Like, and they just said, look, you'll know. Like, when you see it, you'll know. That same day after they moved to the new location is where the Heather testimonial that is maybe the most famous part of this movie.
Oh, yeah.
So that was filmed then, right?
Mm-hmm.
They both filmed one. They both had instructions to do that. And there was a decision made in editing that hers made it so that you did not want one from Mike.
It actually, at that moment, it seemed really believable. And then obviously it didn't help that she had the snot coming out of her nose like it's fucking Niagara Falls.
Oh, boy. That had to be really rough for her. Imagine that shot being up on giant movie screens.
Exactly. Everybody could see your nasal cavity. You know, they could see your untrimmed nose hairs, everything.
On billboards, on fucking posters. Yeah, man. Rough. No way she knew when she was filming that in the woods that that's what it would be. But
right, that's going to be the iconic shot. That's going to be, you know, Michael Myers looking down the stairs. This is going to be, you know, Leatherhead dancing in the road with this chainsaw. It's going to be you.
Leatherface?
Leatherface. Sorry, I apologize. Leatherface.
That is treason on this show.
Sorry, I apologize. Leatherhead, TMNT, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Sorry, what do you want from me?
It's all right, man. So they had no idea it was going to be a house, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first time they see the house is when they do on film. And when Mike says it's a house, it's literally him realizing all the way up and all the way down means in a house.
Right.
Which, of all the things in this movie, that's the one thing that I think is fucking amazing, is like, there's that genuine, like, a line that to people watching it was like, oh, it's a house. Like, they think that's fucking scary. And it's literally him just being like, oh, it's a house.
Right.
Like,
Everything.
now I know what I need to fucking do. So they explore the house, and that house had been abandoned. The Griggs house had sat for quite some time and been vandalized and was full of graffiti and shit. So the cast the crew literally went in there and repainted the walls to then be able to put those little kid handprints all over, and the rune markings or whatever else they put in.
Yeah.
They painted this abandoned ass house to make it, look correct on their film.
Exactly. And then this is the part where young Trevor Charity is breathing heavily, because he starts seeing the handprints and like things come, like 2 and 2 come together, like, oh fuck.
Right. And so the other thing Mike was told was to make sure he stayed ahead of Heather, right?
Right.
As he does all this. So he goes all the way upstairs and then runs all the way downstairs. When he finally hits the basement, 2 crew members grab him and tell him go stand in the corner.
Yeah, okay.
When Heather gets to the basement, Greg Hale grabbed the camera and sat it down on the ground, and another person grabbed her and told her to stop screaming. So that was Halloween night.
Yep.
There were issues. And what you see in the movie is not what was filmed on Halloween night. They had to go back and refilm some of the house the next day.
Okay.
But that night, they did get to come out of the woods and get showers and go to Denny's and eat, surrounded by people in Halloween costumes.
Oh, God. I bet they love that. Especially when they see fuckers with witches costumes on too.
Getting food seemed to be, for what all of them said, the highlight.
Moon's over my hammy.
Yeah, that Denny's meal was fucking much needed from all of them. What's your favorite Denny's meal?
I have to go with the chicken tenders.
Oh, the tendies?
Yeah, always with the tendies.
Yeah. I actually do like the Denny's Moon's over my hammy. That's my go-to as on the breakfast. Grand Slam breakfast menu.
Yeah, exactly.
So that gets them to post-production, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now this was done on a super small budget. Much like there's some weird similarities. I just started a new series on Kevin Smith films called Askew.
Yep. By the way, I love it.
Oh, thanks, man. Which you can find on this same feed. It was done on a very low budget as well, and there's a few similarities between Blair Witch and Clerks. And one of them being the budget was fueled very much by credit cards.
Okay.
This film was shot on a budget of credit cards and small investments from family members. Mm-hmm. They made a 10-minute pitch to present to wealthy investors, but it mostly failed. They didn't get investors. However, it did get the interest of John Pearson, who plays into the story of Clerks, who paid them to do 2 episodes of his show Split Screen. And that helped fund the film immensely. They also used a trick that some of my friends and I used when we made films. They bought the high 8 cam from Circuit City and returned it after they were done. Which that was a trick we regularly used, was to buy a nice film or a nice camera and then return it after. Not a high 8, but
right, yeah.
Yeah. So they went through a lot of cuts going through all the footage for this movie. And now remember, originally the found footage part was supposed to be a part of a bigger mock documentary.
Mm-hmm.
The original cuts of the movie started at about 2.5 hours long.
Oh, wow.
And they were trimmed down over time, removing more and more of the documentary and keeping more of the raw footage.
Mm-hmm.
So they would show it at little film festivals and little places to try to gauge what worked and what didn't. And as they did that, it helped to cut things out. And they saw that the piece that wasn't the found footage just wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
But they found a way to use that as Curse of the Blair Witch, which, as you know, eventually Artisan uses in an amazing way. By the time the movie gets to Sundance, it's much closer to the version that you've seen theatrically. Artisan bought the rights at Sundance. It had a midnight showing at Sundance, and Artisan bought the distribution rights after its midnight premiere on January 25th, 1999, for $1.1 million.
That's a lot of money for this movie.
It is, because at that point, the most that had been invested would have been somewhere around $60,000.
Jeez.
There are those involved that say it was around 35,000. There are some that say it was 50 to 60.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you go on the high side, that's still a hell of a turnaround to get 1.1 million for the distribution rights. Artisan had some changes they wanted to make to the film too. We'll get to that in a second. One of the big selling points to Artisan was, prior to Artisan getting a hold of this, those guys, the Haxan Films group, had done their own viral marketing, which to me is the real thing that this film, if it's going to be celebrated for something, should be celebrated for. Isn't necessarily the movie, but the marketing that went along with it. They made that website, which I can remember long before this movie came out, like through Artisan, probably before Artisan bought this film, I would assume. I think I can remember what I'm guessing. I mean, the 90s get blurry to me, but I'm sure in 98 I was aware of this movie.
Yeah, I remember my cousin actually showing me the website, a young Trevor Charity, and when he went visiting him, was like, "Hey, check this out." And then they showed it, and like you see the missing signs, and then just the like little snippets of the clips and stuff, and man, it was just like I was fucking nerve wracked because I was at this time I was terrified about aliens and ghosts and stuff, and now I just have to fucking worry about witches in the fucking woods. And bear in mind, my cousin, he lived at Elwood Park, New Jersey. I lived in Milford, Pennsylvania, in the middle of the woods, surrounded by woods. I don't need some fucking witch coming out of the fucking woods yanking me when I'm playing N64. Fuck that shit.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Like I can see if you're a kid that lives in the woods, this would definitely be unsettling for you. That website though, man, it was, I would say it was just like a slightly better than an Angel Fire website,
right?
Which kind of added to the authenticity of it. You know what I mean? Where it felt like, oh yeah, this does feel like, like a shitty thrown together website. But one of the big things was, they had like 10,000 people who had signed up on the email list, and people who were really convinced that these 3 fucking kids might be missing. Like, I can remember before it played at Sundance, and I tried to find the footage, and it's not out there that I could find. I remember watching Siskel and Ebert at the movies, and I remember Roger Ebert talking about things they had seen at the Toronto International Film Festival. And he talked about, he saw this movie Blair Witch Project about these missing kids. And so this was at least a year before Artisan's putting this movie out. And it's getting a mention on Siskel and Ebert at the movies because it plays the Toronto Festival.
Right.
And so that drove traffic to the website. You know what I mean? Like, there's this viral thing built up around it where now people are believing this mythology might be real, and they're believing that these kids might actually be missing. And that was one of the things where when the cast is talked to, they talk about why they kind of regret using their real names because, like, their parents were getting, like, sympathy cards and stuff.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, where people thought, like, oh, their fucking kids are dead.
Just imagine going to Heather Donahue's door, knock on the parents' door to talk to them, and then Heather answers the door.
Yeah, and they talked about that too, where like it wasn't a big deal until the movie was out. So this doesn't become a thing until like Artisan has the movie.
Right, right. When you start seeing trailers and stuff.
Right. Now I remember that there was like stories when this movie came out, like on a grand scale, where like, oh, these guys hadn't been able to like audition and act for the time. I mean, this was filmed in 97. The cast talked about how like they didn't know if it was really going to do much as they were going into like 1999.
Right.
And so some of them had still been going to like auditions with this thing Blair Witch Project on their resume, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it wasn't really, you know, a thing yet. Exactly. It was just like something they had filmed. So by August 1999, after this movie's out, the website had received over 160 million hits.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the budget of this film balloons a little bit once Artisan comes on board to between $200,000 and $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
That is a few things. It is part of the marketing that Artisan does afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
It is also because they dragged Mike back out and filmed 4 separate alternate endings.
Okay.
Because Artisan didn't like the original ending. And in the end, after they filmed all of these dumb endings, like one was with him tied to a giant stick figure thing with like a crown of thorns. There was even an idea that was thrown around where they would be like terrorized by a giant stick man. Oh, yeah. So none of those were any good, and they ended up keeping the original one. After that Sundance screening and them acquiring it, they go with a new marketing plan that still stayed pretty viral. They still went with like the missing persons posters kind of thing. The original trailer was leaked on Ain't It Cool News on April 2nd, 99.
Mm-hmm.
And they took the film around to colleges and screened it at like 40 different schools to kind of try to build word of mouth. The biggest piece of marketing they paid for was in June of 1999. A third 40-second trailer was shown before Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Which is always good to show a theater packed of families who are just wanting to go see their laser war movie.
I mean, it worked, though.
Yeah.
It really helped build the whole thing. You know, you've got... That movie was seen by more people than any other movie that summer.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 1 was just it was a cultural phenomenon. I camped out with my friends to buy tickets, not like to get into the movie, but to buy tickets to then go back and see it later.
Yeah, I forced my mom to buy like opening day tickets.
Oh yeah, I was at a midnight showing of Episode 1 and then the first showing the next morning. Yeah. So
yeah, say no more.
Yeah. So the footage that they had shot that had been the mockumentary ends up being Curse of the Blair Witch, which airs July 12th, 99 on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped sink the idea that this was real.
Yeah, this is the thing that I saw that terrified the fuck out of me.
Right. That's the thing that really kind of cemented stuff in for people. The movie opens on July 14th, 1999 at the Angelica Film Center in New York City. Yet another comparison to Clerks.
Mm-hmm.
Before it expanded to 25 cities the next weekend, and then nationwide on July 30th. The opening weekend with 27 theaters or 25 theaters, it earned $1.5 million. When it expanded nationwide in its third weekend, it grossed $29.2 million.
Wow.
From 1,101 locations, placing it at number 2 in the box office, surpassing the science fiction horror film Deep Blue Sea, but coming in just behind Runaway Bride. It also outperformed The Haunting that weekend, a horror movie that had a bunch of money sunk into it and didn't do, half the business that Blair Witch did.
Mm-hmm.
It expanded further to 2,142 screens the next week and pulled in $24 million. But it came in second again behind another horror movie, The Sixth Sense.
Well, there you go.
By its 10th weekend, it was dropped out of the top 10 list. But by the end of its original theatrical run in the United States, the film grossed $140.5 million. In Canada, it grossed $108.1 million. And its total worldwide gross at that time was $248 million.
Jeez, not bad for just a movie that came out practically just out of film school.
Right. It was the 10th highest grossing movie in the U.S. in 1999.
Wow.
And it had a designation which it has since lost. But at the time, it was in the Guinness Book of World Records for top budget box office ratio, where they considered $60,000 versus $248 million for a ratio of $1 to every $10,931 made.
Mm-hmm.
That has since changed. But it's cool that it got in the Guinness book.
Yeah.
It then finds its way to VHS and DVD. It was one of the first movies that I can remember there being a big marketing campaign that you wanted to buy the DVD version because it included footage that wasn't going to be included on the VHS.
Right.
It also had audio commentary and stuff, but that was a big deal at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And they dumped another $15 million into the marketing of the home video release of the movie, and it was a huge success there too. This movie made a lot of fucking money. It also got some really great reviews from some people, and heavily panned by others.
Mm-hmm.
It won some Razzies, including Heather Donahue getting Worst Actress Award, and Greg Hale and Robin Cowie for Worst Picture Award. It was so people it was a big deal, right? The movie was huge. There was, these guys became huge celebrities sort of overnight.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like I said, it's a polarizing movie. People either liked it or hate it. People got sick in the theater, but not because oh my God, bring the barf bag, it's so crazy. It was because the fucking film shook.
Right, exactly. Like, people weren't ready for a found footage film.
Right. I don't know that people should be ready for a found footage film.
Right.
So another thing that they run into is, in addition to Deodato, who made Cannibal Holocaust, being like, no, you guys are not the first found footage film. Like, fucking, I made Cannibal Holocaust in 1980. Like, this is not new. Unbeknownst to the filmmakers, a movie called The Last Broadcast had been made. That was also a found footage film that came out in 1998. And those guys kind of made a big stink at the time and tried to play it up like they were going to sue the Blair Witch guys. And that kind of all went away, and they ended up just using it as a way of being like, hey, man, if you like Blair Witch, probably watch The Last Broadcast.
Right. Have you seen that? Because I'm like, I haven't heard of it, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I watched it back in the day. It wasn't. So look, man, you're not going to hear me say a good goddamn thing about a found footage film because I think they're trash.
Okay.
Like, all right. like I don't want to be that guy, but I am that guy. Like,
I understand. I understand. They're very, polarizing, and they could be just very,
So look, the exception to me is Cannibal Holocaust.
Right, of course.
Because Cannibal Holocaust was a real fucking movie. But, like, so I appreciate what Blair Witch Project tried to do. I appreciate it as, like, an art project, right?
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the idea of, like, okay, you put these people in the woods and you do this, and I love the viral marketing of it. But as a movie, like, it's not a very good movie.
I mean, I will agree on that. It's like, it's not like the best of movies, but I will say that, I enjoyed it for what it was. And I think that kind of helped me spark my love for certain found footage movies. Like, not all found footage movies are, the greatest of things, but there are a few that I really do enjoy that do have the same vein. Like Grave Encounters I liked a lot. I liked the original Paranormal Activity for what it was and how much money it actually cost to be made. It's like, it shows you the ingenuity and all of that. But
right. It's the movie that took the title of least money in for most money out from
exactly.
Blair Witch.
And I do appreciate it, but I will say that it did create a balloon of different found footage movies being made because it's easy to make, and they can get money from it because people will ride high on the, like, oh, I enjoyed these movies, why don't I watch another one? That's why after Paranormal Activity you saw Paranormal Entity, Paranormal this, Paranormal that.
But so that same thing happened with Blair Witch Project, and I don't know if you remember that, but like found footage films in the early 2000s were like the herpes of independent film.
Right,
like,
yes.
They wouldn't go away, and they were fucking everywhere. And like, if you worked at a horror movie convention, there were inevitably like 4 or 5 tables of people with these fucking awful found footage films that saw Blair Witch and were like, oh man, they made money, we'll make some money too, let's go out in the woods, film this movie. And they were all just fucking terrible. And as someone who, like, they and their friends were putting like work into making, our films weren't very good. They were better than that stuff. But it made that whole market very difficult because, like, people almost instantly assumed that if you had made an independent horror film, it was probably some shitty found footage film.
Exactly.
And I thought for sure, like, I will be the first person to admit, I thought that genre was dead as dead could fucking be. And the idea that Paranormal Activity in 2007 became like a thing, and then it launched like that whole, like, there's Cloverfield, there's fucking VHS, and it moved even outside of like horror into like Project X and End of Watch and shit. If you would have told me in the early 2000s that found footage was gonna like balloon again, I would have said you're out of your mind.
Yeah. Probably my favorite one though is Leslie Vernon.
Behind the Mask?
Behind the Mask, yeah.
But that's not necessarily found footage.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, like, it's the same vein, like
Right.
the behind the camera aspect of it, and then it becomes like in front of the camera towards the end of the movie.
Right, and I mean, Romero fell victim to it. He made
Diary of the Dead, yeah.
He made Diary of the Dead, yeah, and like, there's those Houses October built movies, and there's so much of it. Like, it's just it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the guy that stuff's there for. But going back to the curse of the Blair Witch, I think the actual curse of the Blair Witch might have been being involved in the film.
Right.
Because for the actors, life got real shitty. They go from being treated like stars and being like, they're getting limoed around to places. They were flooded by paparazzi and had no idea. I mean, these were like people who were just regular people. Like 4 days before he was on Leno, Josh worked his last catering gig. Heather was driving an 84 Celica past billboards with her face on it.
Jeez.
They didn't get paid well either.
Yeah.
The actors kind of got fucked on this whole film. Their personal privacy is being fucking destroyed. They're being treated like stars, and they're like on MTV, and they're doing all these things and like going to award shows, but they're also like poor. Like they're not, they're not doing well, to a point where Heather Donahue she said a quote in an interview where she said that she was the poorest famous person on earth. And the studio contacted her and they were like, you can't say that. And she was like, well, are you going to cut me a check then? Like, and the insulting part is, like, when that movie broke like $100 million, you know what the cast got?
How much?
A fruit basket.
Jesus.
A motherfucking fruit basket. And like, Mike is no longer an actor. Not even is Mike no longer an actor now, and he has dipped his toe back in a little bit, but he was back to like working his regular job as a mover like a year later, and talked about how he would be moving shit into people's houses, and they would be like, "Weren't you in Blair Witch?
Where's the fucking map, Mike?"
And he would be like, "Yeah, where do you want your fucking couch?" Like, For Heather and Josh, like, Heather Donahue got some work shortly after. She was in Boys and Girls, which was like a Freddie Prinze Jr. movie.
I remember that. Yeah,
with the pie fucker from American Pie. Yeah. So like 2000, 2001, 2002, she was getting work. She was in a TV series called Taken. She did some TV spots like Outer Limits and Without a Trace. And she's actually in an early episode of It's Always Sunny.
Really? Oh, God, I'm going to have to watch back now.
Yeah, she's in Charlie Wants an Abortion.
Okay. All right. Yeah, okay. I know the episode. All right.
Yeah. So like, but Heather eventually drops out of acting too. She doesn't tough it out. It's not doing the thing. And she ends up in the weed business. Like the legal weed business. And that's kind of what she's doing now. Josh is the one guy who kind of toughs it out. Like, he deals through all the stigma of being in Blair Witch Project and does a lot of small movies. He also ends up in an episode of Outer Limits in 2000.
Okay.
But he does a lot of movies that nobody's really heard of, or that weren't like really well received. He gets a lot of smaller roles in some indie films, like he was in Deuces Wild. He eventually ends up in like episodes of CSI Miami. He does the movie Hatchet.
Okay.
He's a cast member in Hatchet. He does a lot of TV like one-offs, where he like comes in and plays a character for just like an episode or maybe a couple of episodes.
Right, just the character stuff.
Yep, he was in the remake of Prom Night, but he's never in like a starring role. He's just kind of like a role player, but he's stayed active for this entire time, all the way up until now. He's still a current active actor, and he's been in some good shit. Like he was on True Detective, and he also looks fairly different than he did then. He's a different looking dude, so you might not always, when you see him in shit, realize like, oh, that's the dude from Blair Witch Project.
Right.
But he's like the only one who really avoided that. The rest of them didn't, and they didn't speak to each other for a while. Right. They didn't. There was a bit of a, I guess, like animosity between them over it. And so there were a lot of people who ended up with like, real issues out of this. Like Heather Donahue, because I watched a lot of interview footage with her today, and I could tell you that the person she was in the movie is not so far removed from the person she is in real life. And she kind of is not the most charismatic or likable person, right?
Right.
And, like, she was living with like people coming up to her on the street and telling her that like they hated her and stuff. which is rough. And then, she was dealing with like, and all of them dealt with this, but like dealing with casting directors not really understanding, like when they would go on auditions, what Blair Witch really was, and that there was acting involved, which I can understand why that would like, it would wear on you, man. It would be rough. It would be a rough way to be. And it's another reason why she regrets using her real name. She's also the one, like she was on all the marketing stuff. Although her name is definitely not the one used the most in the movie. In the movie, they say Josh more times than I don't know. It's just like endless.
Yeah, they literally bellow it.
Josh! 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 Josh!
Josh! Josh!
Josh!
Josh!
Josh!
Josh! Josh! Josh!
Josh!
Josh. It goes on forever. But so like she had weird shit happen though. Like her cousin is the one who made those Blair Witch comic books.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fucking weird.
Yeah. This movie, for the folks that were involved, it was kind of a shit experience. None of them seemed to that they like regret it, it's kind of, a thing that happened, but it definitely played a toll on some of their lives and well-beings. Now, for Artisan, it was a great deal, right? They made a shitload of money.
Yeah.
So much so that they were like, we need to hurry right the fuck up and get a sequel to this thing out.
Yeah, that thing.
So I'm not going to give it like a lot of time on here. I'm never going to cover anything Blair Witch ever again.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine, man. It's fine. I'm glad we did the episode, but like Book of Shadows, man, that movie, holy fuck, is that a bad movie?
It is truly a terrible movie.
Like, for as much as like Blair Witch Project is like not my cup of tea, at least I can respect like the art and the marketing and the idea of it, right? Book of Shadows is just a fucking money grab. And the saddest part of it to me is Joe Berlinger.
Yeah.
That guy made some of the best documentaries of the 90s and 2000s. And this dip into making actual movie is fucking awful. Like, how did the guy who made Paradise Lost and help essentially free the West Memphis 3 eventually fucking make this garbage damn movie? It just doesn't make any sense. It's
Yeah.
so bad.
And even like even the worst part of it is the original script wasn't themed around the Blair Witch. They just tacked on the Blair Witch just to have it, have it be
Right.
the Blair Witch too.
Right. Well, and so it did touch on like one thing that happened for real, which is in the fallout of this movie for, artists making their money and the producers making their money. It actually cost the town of Burkittsville, Maryland a bunch of fucking money because now they have tourism that they didn't want in a way that they didn't want it. And they had to up police, the police presence in the area. The town sign kept getting stolen because it's in the movie.
Yeah.
So people are like, well, I'm going to fucking take that. It was stolen multiple times. The Griggs house had to be torn down because then it was like a historic house. It was in shit shape, but it was a historic house because people were coming and like taking parts off of it and it wasn't safe.
Right.
And they couldn't risk people being in that building all the time. So they had to tear it down. And it just, it created a lot of chaos in that area where like it seems like the residents were real resentful of it for a while and shit. And like, so I get that like there was that little bit of like, Book of Shadows played into like the Blair Witch Tours thing and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it just, man, is that a shit movie? And then the newest one, I couldn't tell you anything about it. There was no way at gunpoint I wouldn't watch that fucking movie.
I did actually go see it. It's all right. I think probably the biggest thing for it was originally it was released to be called The Woods, and then they revealed no, it's actually Blair Witch.
Oh.
Yeah, because like the whole thing when they were ramping it up, they were starting it. It was called The Woods, and then when they released the second trailer, they revealed it's actually a continuation of the Blair Witch. And the story of it is it's like the brother of Heather finds like a new tape that was leaked out, like it was released, and then he goes to look for Heather because he believes Heather's real, and just pretty much
he believes Heather. Well, I think you would believe Heather's real. It's his sister.
No, I meant Heather is alive. Sorry, Heather was alive.
Oh,
that's
okay.
what I meant. Yeah, Heather was alive, and she's still out there, and she released this tape, and like him and his friends go and try to find her, and wouldn't you know it, they don't find her.
Oh boy, damnedest thing, huh?
I know. Jeez, gosh darn it.
So like I know you like this movie, man. Like, what's all your favorite stuff about it? Like, what shit do you dig in this movie?
For one, I like the deal of like the folklore behind it. I'm a big fan of like the American folklore of like witches and like haunted forests and stuff, and just like the mythos they built upon it, because it seems like actually real and flushed out, because like they actually released with the curse of the Blair Witch, they had much more stuff going on in that town other than the Blair Witch, but it all was because of the Blair Witch. It was like the story behind it I really, really liked. And the fact that at that age, I didn't see Cannibal Holocaust. So this was the first found footage movie I've ever seen.
Right.
And I think just the fact that I was scared of it, not because like it was scary, but like the dread behind it, because these, like, not on top of these guys are being lost, but they're being, tormented by this witch that haunts this woods that may be actually fucking with them, because you don't know if he legitimately lost the map or the witch had something to do with it, because like you didn't know if it was like the myth behind it that was playing with it, or it's just their heads playing with it at the same time. And I just think that, when I was like as a kid, it blurred the line of, is it real or isn't? And I thought it was all real until I saw Heather on Letterman. And I'm like, motherfucker.
I've been tricked.
I know, I've been bamboozled.
You sons of bitches. So man, while I don't like the movie, there's shit I like about it. Like I love the fisherman guys.
Yeah.
Like those two did their job so fucking well. Like they're better actors than anybody else in the fucking movie.
Even that little kid who was trying to cover her mom's mouth. Like,
Oh,
no.
That kid is a fucking jerk. That kid's
I
a
know.
bigger jerk than Heather.
I know, but it also felt like the kid didn't want the mom to keep telling the story. Like,
Yeah.
shut the hell up.
Yeah. That shit was good. The townspeople in general are good.
Yeah.
I think that stuff is all, for the most part, the best. I think that's the best part of the movie. I would watch way more of a movie where it's just them talking to weird fucking townies about the fucking weird shit that goes on there.
Exactly.
I would like the movie better if, like, the fan theory that it was the fishermen fucking with them was the real thing.
Right.
Like, there's so many things like that where it's like, this could have been better. And there's so many things, like little things that are wrong with this movie. And it's not even the actor's fault. Some of it is the fucking directors and editors' fault. And it's amazing to me that this movie was so successful with some of, like, the blaring problems. Like, she stands in that graveyard and says, no one in town seems to recall anything strange about the 1940s. Cut to literally everybody in the town saying weird shit happened here in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Heather's like, oh, I didn't hear anything. I sleep like a fucking rock. Whew, that doesn't seem true, like, for the entire rest of the movie.
Clearly you're a college student.
That's true for one night, apparently. You sleep
Yeah.
like a rock. But the rest of the time, not really. You don't. But, like, there's a highlight for me was they got Utz chips in the one scene, which definitely lets you know they're in Maryland. You got a favorite Utz chip, Trevor?
Actually, I like the sweet and spicy. I really like the sweet and spicy.
That's a good chip.
Mm-hmm.
That is a good chip. Utz, underappreciated brand of chips.
Yep, a Pennsylvania staple.
Yeah. So, I don't like this movie, but I appreciate the movie for what it is. And I'm glad that you like it, man.
Yeah, well, I will preface this. This is not my favorite horror movie, but I figure if there's a movie that probably had an impact on me, I would say it's that. I would say it's Blair Witch. Just the fact that, it for me, it blurred the line of reality and scripted.
Right, and I get that, man. And also your age. Like, an 11-year-old should be scared of this movie.
Right.
An 11-year-old's hearing a whole lot of fucks in this movie for the first time, though.
Exactly.
Which I'm sure for an 11-year-old, because, people in a lot of households, they try to not swear around the kids. For a kid, they're like, oh, man, that's how people really talk.
Right.
This has got to be real. Listen to all the fuck words.
They're wearing a lot of flannel.
They sure are. That's funny. That was another thing that Heather Donahue talked about, was like, if you're an actress, probably don't have your breakout film be you with no makeup on wearing layers. That girl, I mean, she had this movie did a number on her, man.
Right.
So that's the Blair Witch Project. I'm not going to hold it against you, Trevor, because the last movie you wanted to do was The Thing, and it's so fucking good.
Oh, yeah.
But this movie is, it is what it is. And it launched a genre, for better or worse. It didn't create it, but it certainly sparked it. Mm-hmm. And some people really like that stuff. There's a whole section of horror movie fandom that their favorite shit is found footage and paranormal activity and all that stuff. And, if that's the thing you're into, cool. It's not, different tastes for different people. I like a lot of B-movie shit that those people probably won't like shot on video shit like Redneck Zombies from the 80s. So that's the cool thing about horror, is there's a bunch of different kinds of it, and there's a different flavor for everyone. But Blair Witch Project will definitely always be around because of what it was in its time. But to watch it now, I'm not sure it holds the same feelings that it would have had for people, in the 90s, if you're seeing it fresh now for the first time.
Right.
Well, dude, thanks for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug?
Well, not really. I'm on Twitter, guys. Come see me at Trevor Charity. Whatever weird nickname I put myself on this month. I have an Instagram, and I'm hoping to eventually do a podcast. So I think hopefully, I'll have one soon. So
right
keep
on,
yours
man.
open.
By the next time you're on, you'll have a podcast to plug.
Hopefully.
Well, the next episode of this show is going to be out sooner than normal. You're going to have it before Valentine's Day because we are covering My Bloody Valentine. The original, not the remake.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So, until then, we're out.
Strength you make is marvelous, kills me up inside. More than just a dream come true, more than just desire. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Some demand deep respect and others deserve. We know that silence makes you wise. We won't bow to the brothers when they refuse to open up their minds. Read the words and search for meaning. Search the words and try to believe. Read the words and search for meaning. Read the words and eat the word that says somebody's gonna pull you from this hole. Somebody's gonna pull you from this hole. Somebody's got to pull you from this hole. It goes up, falls down, and faith comes back around. Some days I can't see the pain through my bliss. I dig you, I hate you, no intent to disgrace you. There's a million lies on my list.